I awoke the following morning to the sound of Riley's car pulling into my driveway. I groaned as I realized it wasn't even 7 o'clock. He was even earlier than the day before, but I had to get up. Sleep hadn't come easy the previous night, not after the note I found hidden within the cover of the diary. It wasn't until I took my prescription sleeping medication before I finally drifted off to sleep. It wasn't something I enjoyed, especially not the morning after, but I didn't have any options. Alex was already awake and had packed a small bag of clothes, snacks, and essential items. He was well prepared, more so than myself. I quickly checked through my own bag, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything, before running downstairs to greet Riley. Even at the 11th hour, I hadn't fully decided whether or not I was going with him. I needed to ask him about my mother's warning. "Good morning, Miss Florence," Riley said as I opened the door. "We have a long drive ahead. Are you sure you have everything you need?" He looked fresh, despite wearing exactly the same suit as the day before. "Mr. Riley, I'm not sure this is a good idea. It's just, well," I felt embarrassed to even say it, so I just handed him the letter. He skimmed over it. As he progressed down each paragraph, he started to look almost sad, as if he pitied my mother. "I'm sorry. Your mother, as great of a woman as she was, had a few, episodes. It's not all she was. She was great, but she had dark moments, like everyone else. If you've changed her mind, I understand. It's difficult to relive the past." He looked at me, expecting an answer. The thought of my mother being crazy returned to me at a record pace. But even if she was, I still needed to collect her belongings. "It's all right. We'll come with you." With that, he opened the trunk to his car, grabbing Alex's bag first and throwing it in. "Won't it be a bit uncomfortable traveling around in such a fancy suit?" I asked, half joking in an attempt at being friendly. He looked down at himself for a moment and chuckled. "I just always dress like this when I'm out and about on business. Makes me feel better about myself, I suppose." "Dress like the man you want to be?" I asked. "Well, my boss always says we're all wearing costumes. That our true nature is hidden beneath the clothes we wear, the makeup we put on, and the faces we fake to convince people we're fine. What you see a person as is hardly ever who they truly are. If that's the case, then I figure it might as well be a good costume." I chuckled awkwardly back at his comment, reaching down to lift up my bag, but Riley got there before me. "Don't worry, I'm an excellent driver," Riley said. As I opened the passenger side door, my fingers somehow got caught in the handle, twisting it around. "Fuck!" I yelled in pain, immediately realizing that Alex was standing right next to me. "Sorry, hon. We're not supposed to say these things." He just laughed in response. Bad words were peak humor for children his age. "I can blow on it to make it feel better," he suggested. I agreed. It was a silly tradition we developed. He gently held my hand and blew on the aching finger. Somehow it actually took the pain away, whether it was just placebo or because it wasn't really wounded. Riley got out from his car and came over to assist me. "Everything all right, Miss Florence?" he asked. "Yeah, I just twisted my finger. I'm fine." The journey would last all of 12 hours, leading us into the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. As we started driving, Alex instantly fell back asleep, but I wasn't that lucky. Despite having built up a significant sleep debt over the past few months, I just couldn't find rest. Instead, I just took a moment to stare at the ever-changing landscape outside the window. As I stared outside, I absent-mindedly kept flicking the lid off the old Zippo lighter. It had been in my pocket for years by then, though I never even used it. "You smoke?" Riley asked. "No," I mumbled as I put the lighter away. It was my mother's, just one of the few things I took when I was sent away. I wanted to ask Riley more about my mother, but I had just met the guy, and for all I knew, he might just have been a lawyer who'd met her once or twice. "You want to ask me about your mother, don't you?" he said after a long moment of silence. "I have to be honest, I didn't know her all that well, just what I've been told, but I'll help you any way I can." He was either psychic or incredibly intuitive. I suppose he would have to understand how people work to be a good lawyer. Still, I was afraid to ask. Either she was crazy and the whole journey would be a reminder of my broken childhood, or she wasn't, which meant I was the one who had given up on her. After a moment of thought, all I could think to ask was she happy? That question plunged the car into silence. Riley sighed, and not out of awkwardness or shame, but because he pitied me. I think she was just lonely. Riley was a man of few words, a fact well proven by the long trip we had together. He never really spoke unless someone prompted him to. Still, he usually knew exactly the right words to use. I felt oddly comfortable around him, but whether that trust came because of his character or because he was the only link to my mother, I didn't know. The journey went on, with only occasional stops to use the restroom and get a snack. Alex was usually the culprit, with his tiny bladder and needing to move around. Riley didn't seem to mind much. He'd just stand by the car and politely wait for us to finish our business. As we got closer to Tenebris, the world around us slowly started to change. Civilization gave way to open fields, and the road that had brought us there transformed to cracked asphalt forgotten by time itself. Above in the sky hung heavy clouds that had been trapped by the valley that surrounded us, creating a cold and airy atmosphere. Though it was only around 5 in the afternoon, it was already starting to get dark. "Is that small diner still around here?" I asked as I felt my stomach rumble. Which one?" Riley asked. "I think it's called Jonathan's Breakfast, Lunch, and Dinner. Not a particularly creative name, but if I recall, they had some decent omelets." "I think so. I'm pretty sure there's something somewhere along the road here." It was odd that he didn't recognize the name. Tenebris was a tiny place with only a handful of pubs, restaurants, and diners. Jonathan's was usually the only place me and my mother had gone out to eat, a treat reserved for special occasions. Riley pulled up into the parking lot. The place hadn't changed a bit since the last time, matching my memories down to the smallest detail. But it almost seemed so old, unkept, and abandoned. While the lights were on inside, it both looked and felt like no one had set foot there in years. "I'll just hang out by the car and make some phone calls. I'll see you in a bit," Riley said. "You don't want us to get you anything? You haven't eaten all day." "Thanks, I'm good. Travel just makes me a bit nauseated." With that, we went inside. Alex ordered his favorite food, French fries with an overabundance of ketchup, while I got myself an omelet. The waitress seemed tired and unsure on how to deal with customers. Still, the food was brought to us quickly enough that I didn't really care. The diner was empty, not a single soul accompanying us in the large interior. The tables were dusty and the radio had been turned off. It was an unwelcoming atmosphere, but we just needed food before heading off. Alex started digging in, but I hesitated with trying the eggs. A smell of sulfur lingered in the air, one I could quickly trace back to the eggs. They were rotten, that much was obvious. The eggs must have been months past their expiration date, which would be an almost impossible feat for any diner. I pushed them to the side, too sick from the smell to even demand another plate. The fries looked rather old themselves. They were clearly frozen products and deep fried, so I doubted they were as bad as the eggs. Still, they seemed soggy. I stole one from Alex, much to his dismay, and tasted it just to make sure he wouldn't get sick. "Mom, why haven't we visited Grandma before?" Alex asked between mouthfuls of fries. I had to think about the answer for a moment. It was an easy question, but not something a kid would have to deal with. "Well, when I was your age, your grandma had some problems, so I was taken away for a while." "Were you sad?" I chuckled. "Yeah, I was sad. But now I have you, and that's much more important." The staff at the diner, wherever they'd gone, never came to check on our table. We just put some money down and left the building. I was still hungry, but it would have to wait until we got into town. "Is it still far?" Alex asked as I put him into the back seat. "We'll be there in 5 minutes, buddy," I answered. "You'll even get your own room." As we got further into town, thousands of memories started flowing back. I saw the playground I spent most of my free time at. Only then, the swing was broken and weeds had taken over the sandbox. A lot of the houses remained unchanged, only with flaky paint and a few broken windows. Honestly, the town had never been well kept. It was a poor place, but since my last visit, it had gotten even worse. "What happened here?" I asked. "This place used to be, well, less depressing." Riley sighed. "Yeah, a lot of people have left town in the recent years. Couldn't tell you why. I don't really think anything changed. Probably just the younger generation going to the big cities, hoping to find their meaning in life." Then we arrived at my old neighborhood. It was run down, standing in perfect harmony with the rest of the aging town. On the side of the street stood a patrol car with an officer checking the street. As Riley parked his car, the officer approached us. I instantly recognized him as Sheriff Morgan Dawson, the very same I'd known him back when I was a kid. "I see you brought some guests," he stated coldly as he saw Riley. Sheriff Dawson redirected his attention towards me, inspecting me with his suspicious eyes. That's Miss Laura Florence, just here to deal with some paperwork." The sheriff's expression immediately changed to a friendly smile. "Aggie's daughter? You're back in Tenebris?" he said as if he couldn't quite believe it. I nodded, glad to see a familiar face, but still a bit freaked out by being back in town. Sheriff Dawson glanced over at Riley with suspicious eyes, but he quickly redirected his attention towards me. "I didn't know you were coming. I'm truly sorry about your loss. Aggie was a great woman, one of the best I ever knew. It's been a rough month since her passing." "Thank you, Sheriff Dawson. I appreciate it." "Morgan," he corrected me. He then fumbled around in his pocket for a moment before pulling out a business card. "If you need anything during your stay, don't hesitate to contact me. This is my personal number, so anytime you need assistance, call." It sounded more like an order than a suggestion. Though he was perfectly friendly, he seemed overly protective of me, despite barely knowing me. Then he turned to Alex, who was getting his things out from the car. "Who's this little guy?" he asked. "That's my son, Alex." He bent down to be on the same eye level as Alex and reached out to shake his hand. "I'm the sheriff around these parts. My job is to keep everyone safe, but I guess you'll take good care of your mother, huh?" Alex chuckled, nodding in agreement. He took a look at my luggage dropped in front of the house. "You're staying at Aggie's old place?" he asked. I nodded. I hadn't thought about other options. Sure, there were some cheap and unsanitary hotels available, but I was there to figure things out. I needed to be close to my mother, or at least as close as I could get. "Right. Don't forget she has a room at the hospice. Might be a bit better kept than the house. She spent most of her time away from home, as you know," Riley interjected. He was right. I hardly had any memories from our old house. Since babysitters weren't readily available, my mother had brought me with her to work, where I'd stayed at her room in Tenebris Care for most of the time. It was probably nicer, but it wasn't a place I wished Alex to stay overnight. "Thank you. We'll be checking out the room tomorrow." "You'll be there for the memorial as well?" Riley asked. I looked back at him with a confused expression. "What memorial?" "We're holding one in Agatha's honor. A final goodbye, if you will." "Are you going to be there, Sheriff?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I've got my own way of honoring her. But I'll pick you up tomorrow and drive you over there." He then turned to Riley. "That'll be all right, won't it?" He nodded in agreement. "I suppose so." There was a clear tension between the two of them, but if they had some history or bad blood that I didn't know about, I thought it'd be best to stay out of trouble. I drive past here every morning anyway. Shall we say 7? "Sure. Thank you, Sheriff." "Please, just call me Morgan," he corrected for the second time. With that, the sheriff got back into his car and drove away. Riley went to unlock the door, after which he handed us the key. The house had been left exactly as I remembered it, old and hardly ever used by anyone. A thick layer of dust had gathered on every available surface, causing the dense cloud to form wherever we went. I coughed after we walked through the hallway into the living room. That, too, was untouched, only affected by the never-ending passage of time itself. However, as we reached the kitchen, I realized it was squeaky clean. Every surface had been polished and disinfected, and on the kitchen table lay a letter without a name. "What's this?" I asked. Riley scratched his head. "I think it's for you." I opened the letter up, only to find a piece of paper that clearly held my mother's handwriting. Riley must have noticed the change in my demeanor because he suddenly looked uncomfortable. "I'll leave you two alone to get acquainted with the house again. You have my number if you need anything. I'll see you again tomorrow for the paperwork?" I asked as he retreated back towards the front door. "Yeah, I'll meet you around noon after the ceremony." "Ceremony? I thought you said memorial." "Right, memorial. I'll see you tomorrow." Once Riley had left, I read the letter. It was a pretty generic will left behind, explaining that all her belongings would pass to me. Not a single word held personal meaning, nor did it give me any closure of any kind. I noticed Alex almost falling asleep on the kitchen table. The journey had worn him out, and it was time to sleep. I started cleaning his room out, but he resisted, demanding that we stay together in one room. I couldn't blame him. The place was awfully old and creepy. Besides, it would be easier to just clean out one room, as tired as we were. By the time we'd removed all the dust, Alex had already passed out in bed. I myself wasn't tired. I pulled the last set of covers off my pillow when I noticed a piece of paper fall out. It was crumbled, made from thick, aging paper that matched what I'd seen in the diary. I caressed it gently, holding it in my hands as if it could turn into dust at any moment. It had a torn edge which matched perfectly with the last page of my mother's journal. I put them side by side just to make sure. The text was more erratic than the previous pages, written with messy letters, filling up both sides of the paper to the brim. I could barely decipher it, and I'd only gotten about halfway through the page when a horrible realization hit me. My mother hadn't just died. She killed herself.